On the screen, we're going to read out of the 28th chapter of Genesis. And this is the story of Jacob's ladder. How many people here know the story of Jacob's ladder? Okay, it's one of these ones that we are told. It's one of those stories. I remember when I was a kid, I used to have this toy, and I don't know what it was, but if you flipped it, the ladder kept flipping down, and no matter how many times you did it, it just kept flipping down, and it was called Jacob's ladder. I have no idea if that had anything to do with the biblical story or not, but that's what I had. And actually, in 20 years of preaching, I have never preached on this topic before. I've never preached on these verses or on Jacob's ladder. So good luck, John. But here's starting in the 10th chapter, or 10th verse of the 28th chapter, it says this: Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. So here we have a story of Jacob. And Jacob is an important part in biblical history. If you continue to read in the story of Genesis, Jacob becomes the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jacob is a very important person. But here we find that God touched Jacob. But before this, you have the story of Jacob that starts when Jacob is in the womb of his mother, where he says that Jacob wanted what Esau had already, even before he was born. So we have that story, if you remember, of Jacob and Esau in the womb, and Jacob reaches out and grabs Esau's heel, trying to pull him back in because Jacob wanted to be first. Okay, and then later on, we have this other story that was foreshadowing that again, Jacob wanted what Esau had. Jacob wanted the birthright. So Jacob kind of manipulated and told Esau, because Esau came in the field one day and Esau's hungry and starving and really needs to eat. So Esau and Jacob are talking, and Jacob says, well, you know what? You're hungry and I have soup. I'm going to give you this soup, but in order for me to give it to you, you have to give me your birthright. So, they talked it over, and Esau is so hungry and famished and he wants to eat. He gives Jacob the birthright. But then Jacob wants even more. He's still greedy, and he wants his father's blessing, because he knows if he gets his father's blessing, he will get a double inheritance in all of the land and all of that. So Jacob fools his father, and if you read the story before this here chapter, it says that Jacob put some wool on his hand, because Esau was very hairy, so he had to fool his dad. So he put some hair on him, and his dad kind of felt around and felt the hair, and long story short, Jacob got the birthright. It was gone. Esau no longer had it. So Jacob won what he wanted. He was greedy and he wanted more, and he got it. And then Jacob had a problem. Jacob said, well, I did all of this, but Esau's not happy. And Esau all of a sudden is plotting to kill his brother Jacob. And says, I want Jacob dead. He stole everything from me. So then all of a sudden we have Jacob, who is on the run. He is running from his brother. He is running from his life. And ultimately he is running from God. And this is an interesting story because here we have Jacob, who becomes the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, starting out life as not a very good person, of trying to get things that aren't his and trying to manipulate people and lie to people and deceive people. And he was victorious until it finally caught up with him. So in this story, we find that Jacob is running. He is leaving Beersheba and trying to get to this place called Haran. He's in this in-between place, running from God, running for his life. And he just keeps going until he finally has to stop. But all of us here can understand what it means to run, because we do it, whether it's subconscious or consciously. We all try to run from things, whether we are running from trying to escape guilt or regret or failures or disappointments, or we're trying to get away from the pain and the loss and the brokenness of life and saying, this is too much for me to handle. I just want to run away. I want to start over. I need to get away. It is too much. I am overwhelmed. So we run. Sometimes we just want to leave behind the parts of ourselves we dislike, the parts of our lives that don't make sense, so we run. Or sometimes we run towards the future. Sometimes people are running not from their past, but they think, oh, the grass is greener on the other side. If I only had a better job, if I only had a better relationship, if I only had this. So they're always running towards something, thinking that that is going to satisfy them. Or we search for answers. Some of us run around life, and our sole purpose is to say, what is the point of life? Why is there suffering? What am I supposed to do? What is my purpose? We have these questions that we run around with all of the time. Or probably something that all of us can relate to is just how much we run around with the busyness of life. That no matter where we go, it seems like we get busier and busier and busier. That we have to-do lists, and our sole purpose in life is to accomplish the to-do list, or get our kids from this event to that event, or go take this promotion at job and take on more responsibility, or whatever that is. We are so busy in life, we constantly run. And a lot of us run ourselves until we have no energy left and we just pass out at the end of the day. But we always run with that mentality of saying, well, just when I finish this project, then I'll get to whatever it is. When I finish this project, or I'm not as busy in life, then maybe God will take some time and take priority in my life. Or whatever that may be. I'll make more time for my family, but right now I just am so busy, I can't do this. So we continue to run, and we run, and we run until it catches up with us. So we could each tell a story of our life on the run. But here is where the story of Jacob's ladder, I think, comes in. Because when we are running, and we are so busy with life, we are so focused on what is in front of us. They call it, in one of the theologians I was reading was talking about how it keeps us on the horizontal plane. That we are just running and we're not paying attention to anything around us, and it just keeps us straight. Well, this idea of Jacob's ladder gets us to understand that there's a vertical plane as well. That God reaches down to us. That God comes down and touches our lives where we are. But sometimes we are so busy and running around with our heads cut off that we miss the vertical parts of life. That we just walk right by them, or we don't pay attention to them. You know, there's a verse in this story where Jacob says, surely God is in this place, and I did not know it. How many of us, myself included, get so busy, get so stressed out, we have all of these other regrets and all of these things we run from, that we miss the connections with God. We miss those points where God comes in. We miss the spiritual part of lives. Because this journey that Jacob's on isn't just a physical one. He's on this spiritual journey as well, where God is trying to get his attention. And it's also interesting to note where Jacob is in this story. Jacob is in the in-between place. He left one place because he had to get away from it, from his problems, and he's worried he's going to die, and he did some not so good things to his family, so he left that place. But it also says he's not quite where he's supposed to go yet. So he's in between those two locations. And it's not necessarily just a physical one. It's kind of telling us where he's at spiritually. He's in between. He's at an in-between place. You've heard me talk about the Celtic idea of the thin place before, where heaven and earth are so close that we meet God, that we can figure out or hear God in a way we haven't heard God before. In a sense, Jacob is in this place. But Jacob had to be in this place. We have to be in the in-between place. It's because in the in-between places, in the places where we're not quite where we're supposed to be or where we're going, God speaks to us when we are tired and we have to sit. So we find that's where Jacob is. And allow me to read this quote. And it says this. It says, that certain place, talking about the in-between places, it says that certain place is a nighttime place where the sun has set. It is a place of darkness illumined by the unknown. It is a place of emptiness filled with presence and mystery. It is a place where physical eyes can no longer see and God dreams now lead the way. Enlightenment is not about what you know, but who you trust, and who you follow. It happens not in the mind, but deep in the heart. So Jacob finds himself in this place, and it's not an easy place. You know, you could even say that part of the story talks about how hard it is that Jacob even had to rest his head on stones because it was a stony place, a barren place. He was just at this place, and we find Jacob saying that he was going and he had to stop because the darkness came and he couldn't go on any longer, or he was tired. So it was in this in-between place when he was tired and kind of broken that God broke through and talked to Jacob. Let Jacob feel this idea. It was a point of surrender, but not giving up. Do you understand that this morning? Like sometimes when we give up and we say, I can't go any longer, I need to rest. It's not that we give up on the journey. It's just at that moment we had to surrender to the fact that we needed a break. And sometimes in our spiritual lives, we get to a point where we have to surrender ourselves to God and say, you know what, God, I keep trying to do this myself, and I'm failing, and I'm so out of energy, and I need you. So it's in that in-between place when we are surrendered, when we are tired, that God speaks to us in ways that maybe we would not hear when we were running around being busy. That's why constantly in the Bible, like the verse in Psalm 46:10 that I quote a lot when I say, be still and let us know that you are God. Most of the times when God shows up in the Bible, people had to shut their mouths long enough to hear God. They had to sit still long enough to hear God. I mean, even the prophet Elijah went up on the mountain and assumed that God was going to be in all of these big events, earthquakes and thunder and storms, and it was a whisper that God showed up. So that tells us Elijah had to quiet himself enough to hear that. Jacob had to sit down long enough and stop running from himself to listen to God. God's vertical access, this ladder, came down and touched Jacob where he was. This became holy ground. And you read that in the verse that Jacob was so moved that Jacob says, this is sacred ground now because God showed up and I heard God's voice. But we have to stop running here. But here is the main point about Jacob's ladder that I think I want you to hear this morning. And it's a little different here. But Jacob's ladder, again, reveals the connection that we have between heaven and earth, between ourselves and our spiritual selves, this connection here. And it wasn't a physical location God was trying to get Jacob to pay attention to. You know, like when people have visions, and God gave prophets visions, and God said, well, at this time in the future, something's going to happen, or I need you to go to this place, because this is the place where I'm going to meet you, or do this, or do that. It was not a physical location. It was within Jacob. I want you to hear that this morning, that God was not pointing to God somewhere out there, but God was pointing to something within Jacob that said, Jacob, I'm already here. Jacob, pay attention because I am within you. Jacob, pay attention to when life comes and you are so busy and you are running that you just take a breath, and I am intersecting here at this vertical and horizontal access. But it is within Jacob. It is within all of us. It's not really a vision, it's a dream. That is so deep within Jacob that Jacob said, I was never apart from God. How many of us pay attention to that? That we always think God is over there, or God's out there. Man, if I'm just quiet, I'll see God, or I need to grasp God, or I need to reach to where God is, without realizing that God is within me all of the time. But am I surrendering myself enough? Am I slowing myself down enough in life to pay attention to that? To hear God say, John, I'm already here. This is already a holy place, a sacred place, because I am within you. That is a big deal. And we call it Jacob's ladder, but it's really not just possessed by Jacob. It's possessed by all of us, if we can just pay attention long enough to do that. And again, a quote here says, the miracle is not that God shows up and breaks into our lives. That is always happening. The miracle is that we recognize it within ourselves. The ladder is revealed in the lives of fugitives, in the dark places of life where the sun is set, and people who have lived up to their names, in the hard, stony places, in the in-between places, in places we never would have expected. Surely God is in this place, and I did not know it. This story is getting, at least it got me, to pay attention to the fact that God is already here. That God is already intersecting in my life and the lives of those around us, whether or not I am paying attention to it. But if I want to have this connection to God, if I want to be touched by the holy, if I want to have this spiritual life, I need to slow myself down enough to surrender and say, all right, Lord, this is about you. All right, Lord, I'm done running from all of this nonsense. Help me realize that you are within me and going to build me up. So wherever we may find ourselves on this journey, whether we are running from other things, whether we're running from God, or maybe we have found ourselves in the in-between place and said, you know what, John, I had no other choice but to be in this place because life just knocked the energy right out of me. But I guarantee you, when we are in these places, God is there with us. And I love how one of the scholars put it to end the commentary on this. It said, you know, Jacob was saying, surely God is in this place and I did not know it. Well, we have to pay attention enough to all of a sudden change that to say, surely the Lord is in this place and now I know it. Surely God is in this place and now I know it. God speaks. God talks. God gets a hold of us. As I about fall off the stage. The sermon probably would have been over at that point. But God comes. Can we slow ourselves down enough, like Jacob, to surrender to God? And look at what happened in Jacob's life. Jacob was a thief for all intents and purposes. He was a liar. He was greedy. But God said, Jacob, you're not being true to who you are. Jacob, you have a calling upon your life, and you are messing it up with all of this nonsense. But it wasn't until Jacob got to a place where he's like, I can't keep doing this anymore. And he came to this place of this in-between where God touched Jacob. God said, Jacob, you have a purpose, and your purpose is to continue the line of my people. Next week, we are going to talk about when Jacob wrestles with God. And then Jacob gets a new name. And does anybody know what Jacob's name is? Israel. He becomes God's. But it took God to get him. It took God to say, here we are in between. You're not where you're supposed to be and you're not to where you're going. But let me touch you. That ladder came down within Jacob. And Jacob said, here is God, and now I know it. May we figure out where God intersects with our lives. But maybe first we have to slow ourselves down and lay ourselves and say, all right, Lord, here I am. Let us pray. Lord, you have placed your Spirit within all of us. Help us to quiet ourselves and slow ourselves down enough to feel it, to hear you, to be in the in-between place where we know that ladder is coming down and intersecting with our crazy, busy lives. Help us to realize that we have a calling and it is bigger than what we think. So whatever we may find ourselves running from today, good, bad, or indifferent, slow us down and meet us. Come from within us to remind us whose we are and what we are called to do. And all of God's people said, Amen. If you'll please stand as the praise team comes to close us